Great weekend with us. We're here today to talk about Austerity's Unelected Technocrats, a Marxist critique of Europe. And you'll see from your programme that Tariq, who has been confirmed for this event for quite a long period of time, went to Greece, and as events have unfolded in Greece, has quite rightly stayed there to do, he's been invited to do talks on the left. So he has recorded a short piece by film for us to watch for the event. So I do apologise that he's not here in person, but we do have as well Chris Bambery, who is a supporter of the Scottish left and author of The People's History of Scotland and Second World War, a Marxist history, and will obviously be able to elaborate on what Tariq says and his own thoughts and analysis and take questions and all your contributions, so we will still be able to have a really good debate, I hope. So I'm going to ask the guys at the back to press play on the film of Tariq, and hopefully everything will work. Let's have a look.
Dear comrades, very sorry I won't be able to be with you at the conference this weekend. I'm in Athens, stuck, but stuck for good causes, discussing with comrades and others on what is to be done over the next few days. As you probably know, the European Union has decided to crush Syriza and crush the government. There is no other way of looking at it. And before returning to what's going on in Athens, let me just say to you that I think it's time now that the left in Britain discuss Europe seriously. Taking it for granted as the mainstream parties or as the Labour Party and many other left groups do as something that is automatically progressive is no longer possible. The way in which this union has revealed itself as a bankers' union, as a financialized machine for imposing neoliberalism on the whole of the EU, was already predicted in the referendums that took place in Ireland, Holland, and France some years ago, when the French voted against the European Constitution precisely because it was imposing neoliberalism. That was going to be cemented, and that Constitution has not been changed. So given that we've got a referendum coming up in Britain, how we vote is not unimportant in order to punish the people who've imposed austerity on the whole continent and are in particular punishing Greece. The argument that simply because UKIP or the Tory right have called for a referendum means we have to vote for Europe is utterly ridiculous. We decide on the basis of our own motives, our own principles, our own politics. And so we need to open up this debate on Europe as soon as we can in Britain to decide what to do. Now here in Athens, the mood is very somber, and the big question, in fact there's only one question. Having gone so far, having capitulated to the EU elite, having abandoned its entire program, is Alexei Tsipras going to go even further? He's already on his knees. Is he now going to lie down on the ground as they trample all over him? That is the only question. The indications at the moment are not good. Instead of seeing these new impositions which the International Monetary Fund is imposing in order to punish the Greeks even further, instead of rejecting them outright, saying this is a joke, returning, reporting to the Greek Parliament, and deciding on a way out of this as rapidly as possible. The discussions are still going on. They can't go on forever. They will have to decide tomorrow, and on Monday there will be a vote in Parliament. And the key thing now is this: which way will the Syriza left vote? If it is a vote of confidence in the government, it puts enormous pressures on the Syriza left because they don't want to be accused of bringing down this government. On the other hand, confidence now becomes confidence in how it has handled negotiations with the EU elite. And on that basis, in my opinion, you can't have confidence in this government, which has wasted 5 months. Wasted 5 months in hoping against hope that the EU elite would ultimately stitch up a compromise. They have refused completely. They do not wish to compromise. They want to destroy this government, everything it stands for. They've already discredited some of its leaders for having gone as far as they've gone, and they want to do it further because they want to crush any alternatives rising anywhere else in the continent, especially in Spain. They're very worried about the rise of Podemos in Spain, so they want to make it clear, this is what we'll do to you if you don't fall into line. So a lot is at stake, really. And a defeat for the Syriza leadership, which looks likely now, might be the only way to move forward. From the beginning in Greece, there was a huge contradiction between the mild social democratic program of the Syriza party and the insistence on remaining within the Eurozone. This is now imploding, totally imploding. So they have to understand that they've been outmaneuvered, outflanked by the EU elite, and hanging on there is not going to do anyone any good. If they capitulate further, it'll be a dual suicide. A suicide for Syriza, a suicide for the Greek people, we could say a triple suicide, and ultimately is suicide for the political career of Tsipras, this young politician in which we had so much hope, and more than us, the Greek people had so much hope.
Okay. Okay, just to say, obviously, that was recorded before we knew there was going to be a referendum. But obviously very grateful that he spared the time, although it was very noisy, and I apologise for that, but Tariq Ali was managed to share his thoughts with us. And I think going from the terrific hope we had after the Greek elections to then fear and now terrific anxiety, Chris is going to talk us through the whole expanse of the argument and discussion around Europe, and help us with our discussion. So please give Chris a very warm welcome.
I'll start by saying the position I'm going to argue is not a popular one on the left among Scotland, who are viewing the upcoming European referendum as a possibility for a trigger for a second independence referendum, on the idea that the people in England are going to vote no to Europe, people in Scotland vote yes. I think they're going to be proved wrong about this for a number of reasons, but in particular, I think given what we saw in the Scottish referendum, where the UK elite was prepared to deliver to get the result they wanted, we should be under no illusions what the UK elite will do to get the result it wants over a European Union referendum. And we've already seen the Queen intervening into the process. We're already seeing the economic threats being made to what will happen if people in Britain exercise their democratic right to quit the European Union. The same shock and awe will be brought into play in order to force through the result that the British elite want. But I'm going to give 5 reasons why I will be voting no in that European Union referendum. The first is just simply the calvary that the people of Greece are being put through by unelected bodies, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. There is no democracy whatsoever in this. Austerity measures imposed, the kind of which we have not seen in Europe since the early 1930s, huge attack on living standards and jobs right across the board, not just in Greece but across southern Europe, and we saw it as well in Ireland as well. We should be aware of what is going on, and it should draw attention to actually what the real nature of the European Union is. Because it brings me to my second point, which is about democracy. And democracy is very important here. There is fundamentally nothing democratic whatsoever about the European Union, and we should not be ashamed in saying that. This is the Vice President of the European Union in January this year. We don't change our policy according to elections. And of course, when the people of France, Ireland and the Netherlands have voted in against the Treaty of Lisbon and other things, The European Commission's response, an unelected body, I'll keep saying it, has been, you have to vote again until you produce the right result, the result we want. Right? There is a complete. The European Union is run by a council of ministers, the government of the member states coming together. That has nothing to do with democracy. The people who then then appoint as a European Commission appoint. The European Commissioners are made up of elite politicians, people who have shown their worth to it. Right? They are not accountable to anyone. Backing this process up is a European Central Bank, which of course is unelected as well. Adding into this is to the Troika, the ECB and the European Commission, which has imposed these measures, of course, is the International Monetary Fund. Since the onset of this financial crisis and before, we have also seen a whole series of measures being rammed through, which means the question of democracy will come through. I'm just going to mention one before I move on to neoliberalism, which is, for instance, the European Commission now has the power to oversee the extent that any government in the EU can run a budget deficit, and it also has the power to approve the budgets of member states. These have been rammed through in the last 5-6 years. What Tariq is talking about is right. They're not just out to crush Syriza. You'd have to envisage a situation in which a 1945-style government was elected in this country. I know it's hard to imagine this, but directly the European Commission would come in and say your budget deficit is too great, Mr. Attlee. You're not going to do this because it doesn't accord with our diktat. You're not going to create the welfare state. This is just simply off agenda. Right? Now, I know this isn't the familiar territory we're used to, but actually, in this situation, I'm against a multinational, undemocratic body coming in and actually dictating what can be done in either Britain or in Scotland or Wales by elected parliaments. The third reason is about this attack of neoliberalism. There was a brief period in the late 1980s when the rhetoric of the EU, a man called Jacques Delors, was of a social Europe. A very brief period. He came and spoke at the Trade Union Congress's conference, and under the curse of Thatcher, most trade union officials in the Labour Party rushed towards the law, believing this was somehow salvation from Brussels. Within literally a year, the Maastricht process was put into place, which created the euro and the current setup. Cheered on, we should remember, my Margaret Thatcher. She was one of the architects of the whole Maastricht situation that was set up. Her arguments were different arguments, but she loved the neoliberal aspect of this. And what we have seen since is really the encapsulation in the Treaty of Lisbon of the necessity of neoliberal measures across Europe. That's the constitution of the EU, rejected, as I say, by France, by the Netherlands, and by the people of Ireland, forced to vote for it again. And a whole series of measures since the financial crisis which have continued this neoliberal drive. And again, I'm going to be careful about this. The driving force in this is the German government. Now, just again, because it's easy for us to be aware of slipping into anti-Germanism in this country, I'm not about to impersonate a Lancaster bomber, but the simple truth is the EU is effectively run today by Merkel. Having broken with the old access with France, who have now been shoved aside to a large extent, it is Merkel and the German central bank who are absolutely crucial to this whole process, and you see it in the negotiations with Greece. What we should be aware of, what Germany has done, is that 10 years ago, under a social democratic government, the SPD government forced through one of the biggest slashes in living standards by suddenly understanding that by attacking benefits, the consequence is lower wages. Because if you remove any with the attacking benefits, it's not just simply an attack on the disabled and other people, it's attacking all of us to drive down their wages across the board. Germany, of course, then used the cut in labour costs to dump its exports in southern Europe, creating a massive trade imbalance with countries like Greece. And we should be aware of this. You know, it's behind the so-called German success story. But of course, it then triggers a continuation of the race to the bottom. Because once Germany drives down living standards and wage costs, every other country does. We have now seen legislation passed by the European Commission saying every European Union government has to increase productivity and reduce labour costs. The British government's doing very well on the latter. Not so well in the first one, productivity, because of course no one in Britain is investing. But we're never told that bit of the equation. As I mentioned, measures were then put in place for budgetary control to prevent any government going out of line from this neoliberal liberal mantra. I'm going to move on to the fourth reason why I should, migration. What we are seeing in Europe at the moment is a disgusting scandal where the richest corner of the world is putting up signs to people fleeing war and recession saying you cannot come in here. And actually it's worse than that, because it's not quite true they can't come in here. What they are doing is creating a situation where, almost in Darwinian terms, the people who can eventually get to Europe by these sea crossings and smuggling routes are almost inevitably going to be the youngest and fittest, and the old and the children are the ones who are going to die on the route. And of course the point about immigration controls always is not that actually they're about stopping immigration. The American Marxist Mike Davis points out about creating what he calls a dam. So behind the dam you build up a reservoir of cheap labour which you can draw on when you want. I mean, you just have to look around this city. This government is not serious about stopping immigration in one sense, because British capitalism relies on immigration. What it wants is precarious, frightened people prepared to do any job, any work, and keep their heads down all the way through. And again, of course, putting pressure on us. There's an element of truth to that side of it, but that doesn't mean you should go along with it. And really, you know, I have no sympathy whatsoever with the Prime Minister of Italy, Renzi, who's a disgusting figure. But just on this one issue, he was quite right this week to get angry with it. You know, Britain has taken in less than 1,000 refugees from Syria, the main place where these people coming to, trying to get to Europe are coming from. And we are effectively saying, okay, you can either stay where you are, you can stay, for the vast majority of refugees still are in Jordan, in Turkey or elsewhere, or if you get to Italy, we're not taking you in. And you have this farce, disgusting farce about what's happening in Calais, which clearly the British government are responsible for, all the different governments form. We should remember that the Fortress Europe is a result of this, and again it's a reason I will remember the dead outside of washing up on the shores of Lampedusa when I come to vote for this. And really, when you hear Hungary is building a fence along the border with Serbia, given Hungary's, a EU state's own recent history in terms of what happened in the Second World War and the Holocaust, its own domestic situation with the rise of fascism in Hungary, clearly Europe is moving somewhere else. The citizens of Europe have free movement. No one else in the rest of the world, apart from some North America and elsewhere, have it as well. And the fifth reason I'm going to vote for against on it is about the question of peace. Because war has returned to the European Union, is now almost de facto reliant on your membership of NATO. One of the reasons why the SNP changed its policy in NATO prior to the referendum, if Scotland had become independent, staying in the EU, it's almost now recognised you have to be part of NATO. But what they told the people of Ukraine was a lie. They encouraged them to overthrow a government on the basis that Ukraine would be promised membership of the European Union. It is not going to get membership of the European Union. It has not been given membership of the European Union, which clearly it's for it to do. Added to this, of course, is the International Monetary Fund coming from the other side to impose a structural adjustment programme. It was obvious as well, as soon as this was encouraged in Ukraine, that Russia was not going to sit and watch this idly by. You don't have to be an admirer of Vladimir Putin, I'm not at all. But the Russians aren't going to allow Ukraine to join the EU with potential NATO coming in as well, and just let this happen 300 miles from Moscow. So I think it was a callous, calculated thing that the Europeans did in Ukraine. They then create a war situation and effectively just let this sort of rumble on, refusing to acknowledge their existence. And of course, since then, we've seen NATO, American tanks introduced into the Baltic states, the upping of an offence force against this. This is very dangerous times. You do not have to side with Russia in any of this to understand what the European Union chiefly has done in this. And I said 5 reasons, and I am going to toss in the last 6th one, which is TTIP. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which again will open up, as you know, the privatisation of the National Health Service at an even greater scale, which is being negotiated by the unelected European Commission in secret. We're not allowed to even know what this is. We can guess it is absolutely filthy in terms of what it's going to do, because they're opening up a free trade area with North America We already know that multinational capital are going to be serious rights over sovereign states who are actually held responsible for introducing legislation which they argue impinges their behaviour in terms of it. This is the most extreme. Therefore, as I say, I will vote no in the referendum. I will vote no, holding my nose at the understanding that we have people from UKIP and the Tory right voting alongside us. But I don't think we have any alternative, as Tariq explains. And I'll vote no, not because I'm against Europe. My partner is Italian and my two children are both bilingual and dual citizens of it. It'd be a bit slight pain in me if we left the European Union. But I would do so because actually I want a united Europe. I regard myself as a European. But I do not want a united Europe based on what we have now of the European Union. It has to be one built in solidarity. It has to be one built in respect. It has to be one built based on welfare. None of this is there. And the final thing I'm just going to say is this as well. There is no possibility of reform inside the European Union. So when it came to democracy, I didn't mention the one institution which is supposedly democratic, which is the European Parliament, which we get to vote for. In very small numbers, I have to say, every so often. I mean, the obvious points about the European Union, hands up who can name the MEP. It's a tiny number. Yeah, I can name the one in London, I'm trying to remember. Claude Moraes, I can always remember. I can get away. I think I'm struggling after that to think of any of them. It is, in obvious terms, even more unaccountable. It's hard to imagine than Westminster. You know, much more than Holyrood in terms of it. But it is a cabal. It is run by two cartels of the centre-left and the centre-right who agree everything with the European Commission. Nothing goes before the European Parliament unless it's been agreed by the heads of the two main parliamentary groups and the European Commission. It's stitched up. They have effectively only the right to amend the proposals of the European Commission, so it's highly undemocratic. And there is another issue as well. The corruption associated with it is effectively buys off every member of the European Parliament. And the strange thing is Nigel Farage makes a great deal of noise in this country, but I can't actually remember him doing anything of note in the European Parliament, because you get a huge amount of finance from the damn thing. You could do things. I mean, not a political hero of mine, but I remember the Reverend Ian Paisley being thrown out of the European Parliament for his opposition to the Pope addressing it. It's a fine stage for disruption. But even the radical left there don't do it. They play the game. They're bought off. And there is something deeply corrupt about it. The main point is the European Parliament cannot reform the European Union. It's not got the ability to do so. So that is why I'll vote no on when the referendum comes up. And I think Tariq's right. We have to have a left campaign, because if we just stay silent on this, the right will continue to take the issue. And we have things to say about the European Union, profoundly important, about democracy, neoliberalism, racism, and much else about it. And actually the dissatisfaction with the European Union is growing across the continent. And if the left is associated with clubbing up a club for the elite, which is what it is, we will be tarnished with that brush. We need to come out and put the radical left case against the EU.
Thank you very much, Chris. And 6 great reasons for us to debate. So if you'd like to indicate if you'd like to ask a question or participate in the debate, I'll take a few at a time and then ask Chris to come back. This is quite a big room and it's quite difficult to see, so wave frantically at me. Yes. Who's got the mic? Yes, great. Could you... And then could you keep your hands up over here, just so I've got that.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris, for that. I mean, I agree with all the points you're making, and I think that there's just 2 I want to make. The first is that the EU has become a source of, it's created a gigantic reserve of cheap labour. That's what the accession of the East European countries was about. That's what the accession of Malta and Cyprus and Greece and all the poorer countries is about. and yet at the same time they're given low wages, they're used as a flexible workforce in Western Europe when it pleases everybody, but at the same time they're forced to compete in terms of German wages when it comes to buying goods, and therefore this is one reason there's a massive amount of borrowing. So that's one thing that nobody ever seems to take account of. The second thing is this question of immigration, because everybody I've seen on the left has said we've got to vote yes in a referendum because otherwise everybody's going to be taken out of the country. All the people who live here from Europe will have to go back, which isn't going to be what happens, by the way. It will be exactly like it is in Switzerland and some of those other countries where there will be certain forms of citizenship and movement of labour, because, as Chris says, Britain needs immigration and that isn't going to stop. But this, you have to be realistic about EU immigration. It is white immigration, and that's what they don't mind the freedom of movement for. Whereas when it comes to Indians, to Africans, to all the people who are trying to get across the Mediterranean, there's a very, very different set of priorities. But I also think we need to say something else about the referendum. I don't actually think the main point of the referendum is going to be about immigration. It, of course, is an important issue, and I'm in favour of the free movement of everybody who wants to come to this country. But I believe it will be, the Tories don't want it to be about immigration, and they will try to marginalise UKIP over this. It will be, as it was with Scotland, you can't live without these people, you're all going to be poorer. It will be the elite telling us we have to put up with shit so that things can get better in the future. And it seems to me we have to have a class perspective on this, and not just one which says we don't like UKIP and therefore we're going to vote yes. I think that's a really, really unsatisfactory way of looking at it.
Thank you very much. There's a sister over there. Stand up. I think the mic's just coming round to you now.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to pick up a couple of things, just sort of to kind of question a bit, because I think it's more complex and we ought to be able to deal with that complexity. Sorry. So on the migrants, the migrants coming over in boats and arriving in Italy and so on, the problem of receiving those migrants within Europe has come from the individual European member states rather than the EU as a whole. The EU has made some attempts, was making some possibly feeble attempts to try and get some agreement on that. And on TTIP, I'm wondering if Britain comes out of the EU and TTIP is passed within by the EU Parliament at the end when it's finally passed, would we not anyway? Would we be able to escape the impact of? And finally, just to say that there's a big social movement within Europe that is growing, and I think there is also the possibility of people's movements. I mean, it's difficult to develop a people's movement within one country, but I think we also do need to do it across Europe as well.
Thank you very much. Somebody was just behind you to your left. So, yeah.
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Chris on his excellent analysis. Make a few points. I mean, I was a member of the Labour Party from 1973 to 1994. When I was first joined it, overwhelmingly the Labour Party membership was against it. It was hate. The only group in favour was a tiny right-wing rump of people like Roy Jenkins, who eventually joined the Social Democrat. I mean, the Labour Party have been conned. I mean, even left-wingers in the Labour Party now support it. So for some reason they've been brainwashed. And what for the future? What we've got to build a campaign. We've got to build a united fronts organisation for the referendum. Get all the left groups who are against it, the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, Amplifiers, Socialist Appeal, and those lefts in the Labour, Communist Party of Britain, those lefts in the Labour are against it. We've all got to, when a few months before the referendum, form a strong no vote on a socialist basis will create a massive crisis for the world's ruling class. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a person at the table at the very back behind you. Pardon?
It was a stretch.
Okay. All right. I would like to take one more before Chris comes back. Yeah. Yes, behind you there on the by the window.
I'm completely with you on the horrors of Euro and a no vote. I wonder if you could just say something about how the world would look if we did come out. You could well imagine a stronger alliance with America straight into TTIP, an alliance with a right-leading France, with Le Pen and Sarkozy and everything else. So I think we'll have to make these arguments about, I'm against Europe, but how will the world look if we came out, and how would we be an improvement on what we are now? The counterfactual could be worse.
Okay, Hugh, Chris, would you like to come back on, those
I
points?
want to come back on the refugee thing, because I don't want to defend in any way the Italian government, but you have to remember they did put in place a rescue operation in the Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, which the European Union scuppered, replaced it eventually under immense pressure with a much reduced Operation Trident, as I recall it being called. And even now, in response to these horrors of what's happening, what we're seeing is governments like Britain putting naval vessels in to the Mediterranean. And the idea, of course, is being to return those people to countries like Libya or elsewhere. And this emphasis of what we're supposed to do, as the British government keeps saying, is we want to go after the people's traffickers, no reference to it. And the situation of these people, the biggest percentage of the most recent killings came from Syria and Eritrea. I haven't got time to go into Eritrea today, but we have created these situations. We have created the chaos of Libya. And our response still seems to be that we want to build more and more fences around our borders to keep these people out. And of course, they know, and this is the point I'm trying to make, we can't keep these people out. Desperate people will get through. But it will be the youngest and the fittest tragically who get through, who will then be giving you your cup of coffee in the morning, or queuing up for employment for a building site at the side of the road. So I think we do have to go for the European Union on this. And I think effective scrapping of the Mare Nostrum, I think was really disgusting in terms of that. I'll just add something to it. I've had some involvement with the refugee crisis in Italy, and I have to say, it is unfortunately the case that the left there has not responded very well to it, or the trade unions. It's been left to sort of NGOs, Catholic, the more radical wing of the Catholic Church, etc., to pick up the pieces and try and settle this. But I mean, really, it is an incredible situation when you think about it. Free movement of labour for EU citizens, but you have the situation in Calais with a squatter camp, Ventimiglia with a squatter camp, people dumped in Bulgaria, one of the poorest countries of it. I mean, I can go on with this. This is a disgusting situation. Lindsay's point about the East and West is absolutely correct. I think it's fascinating to go to Berlin to see that while the Berlin Wall may have come down, it's still there. And it is obvious the discrepancy between East and West is absolutely staggering. And it has been used in exactly the way you talked about. How the world will look like differently. First of all, we could escape this of TTIP. Even just in exemptions, which the Cameron government won't do, saying the NHS should be exempted from it, which the SNP, that's the only thing they've effectively done. But I mean, in Scotland, we could get some concessions from it. But I think the key thing is to try and oppose it, and particularly expose it. I think it's interesting what the world would look like, because this was a bit of a debate in the Scottish referendum about what we would look like. And the truth is, we could start to do things in terms of rebuilding industry. I don't mean rebuilding steelworks, but real viable industries. In Scotland's case, using the technology we've developed in the North Sea. Renewables, obviously, because we're moving to a situation where we're entirely reliant on renewable power in terms of it. But we could also look, in terms of this country, at who we trade and have links with. We discussed this in Evans. I mean, we are still completely focused on Europe, essentially, on North America. And the world doesn't look like this anymore. And I'm not sure that, even in terms of capitalism, there's a certain logic. I was in India last month. Why are we not developing relations with India? Why is Britain really absent from Brazil? Now, part of the answer, of course, is we've got very little to sell, apart from guns and weapons. But the world is changing. Why isn't there a discussion, even in terms of capitalist terms, about how things might change? Latin America, building links with Africa, which actually quite significant things are happening. And I think, rather than banning bananas from Cameroon and stuff, we could start making agreements with governments in Africa, benefiting them and their people, and benefiting us. Because at the moment, actually, one of the reasons why agricultural prices is so high, of course, is that it's protected in the European Union. And we should be scrapping that. That is at the cost of people like countries like Africa. So I think I'm not answering the question, but there is a debate to be had about what the world could look like. And to be honest, there is a world outside of London's focus on Europe and North America. There is a bit more to the world than that.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, could I have another show of hands of people who'd like to join the conversation? If you just want to write a question down on a bit of paper and wave it about, a yellow t-shirted person will pick it up and bring it to me. So, yes, Chris? Just put your hands up while he's talking so I can just see who else to take.
I mean, I too agree with the, for the left, an easy argument, especially to begin with, and I think we need to think carefully about how we're going to present it. But I tell you one thing that is going to make it a whole lot easier as an argument to win, and that is the situation in Greece today. Because nothing could make clearer the real agenda of the European Union than the way that they're leading the richest countries in the EU are trying to crush the Greek people, destroy the Greek economy, and completely ignore the democracy there. So, you know, this shows very, very clearly that it's a austerity organisation, it's a neoliberal organisation that is trying to impose that kind of economics, and it shows it's nothing to do with solidarity. I mean, those people, it's an understandable general feeling that, you know, we want to be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Europe, but this is not what the EU is about. It's about actually the opposite. And I think we need to reclaim a different kind of solidarity, because to be honest, what we need to do in the next few weeks, I think, is show solidarity, stand up, stand alongside the Greek people who are opposing the EU. And actually, there's going to be a week of action apparently that's been called in October, which may well coincide with the Manchester protest, which is handy, which I think we all need to be a part of. But anyway, in whatever way possible, we will have to be doing what we can to support the Greek people. And in this case, that actually involves being against the European Union. That actually involves, because what's this ballot going to be about if it actually happens? And they're trying to even not allow the ballot to take place. But if the ballot does take place, whenever it is next Tuesday, it's going to be, or next Thursday, I think it is, it's basically going to be a ballot about staying in or exiting from Europe. And we're going to have to be saying loud and clear that we stand with the Greek people when they oppose the austerity package, even if that means leaving the European Union.
So could I see who would like to make the next comment or ask a question? Because people get shy at this point, and then it's a shame at the end when we have lots of hands up. So who would like to continue? Yes, thank you. There's a person here. Just put your hand up if something occurs to you while they're talking, and then I can call you next.
Thanks. I mean, I agree completely that there has to be a radical left campaign against being in the EU, but I do worry about when you know, people say that the campaign isn't going to be about racism and migration, because I think it could be. And if the establishment and the Westminster elite are defending the current situation, I think that could give even more space to the UKIPs of the world to promote themselves as the outsiders. So I think that while being against austerity, we have to really be against racism, Islamophobia, and all the other horrible things that we're seeing in the Mediterranean at the moment, where, you know, I think, what kind of world is it where, you know, people are left to drown or to starve, or, you know, I think there is widespread revulsion against that here, and I just, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, person here.
I wondered what your...
Do you want to just wait for the mic, because it's quite a full room. Thank you.
I wondered what your opinion was on the initial deal, or the proposal that Yanis Varoufakis and the Greek party put forward. Just opinion on that, basically.
Okay, thank you for that nice, precise, short question. If there are any more questions like that, please do feel free to ask them. We could take another one before I ask Chris to come back again. I can't see, sorry, is there somebody over there? Behind the pillar.
Hi, I just wanted to question your assertion about the unreformability of the EU. Because, I mean, it has taken 50, 60, 70 years to develop the institutions that we have just now. And I agree with you that I think it would be great to have a kind of social, inclusive Europe that's different from the EU we have just now. But I think if we just left the EU, it would take a long time to build those kinds of institutions that we would need, because without them it would just be the elites making decisions for everyone else. So yeah, for reforming the EU, I mean, we've got the Parliament, which has seen a much increased role over the last few decades, so I think it's maybe a bit too much to say that the Parliament isn't any use for anything. I think there is a role there for it to play. But also, it's not the only democratically elected decision maker in the EU, because the European Council is made up of the leaders of the European countries. So, I mean, Molly Scott Cato, the Green MP, was asked about the democratic deficit in the EU at the Green Party conference a while ago, and she said that she didn't believe there was a democratic deficit in the Parliament, but that it was more the unaccountability and the poor, like, lack of participatory democracy in national elections, which meant that the national leaders that made up the European Council weren't being held to account and weren't taking part in the EU in a democratic manner and representing their peoples. So I just wanted to stop by that.
Okay, thank you. Is there time for have another one? Yes, there's a sister just here.
Just a point about the migration. So Germany, for example, have taken loads more migrants than we have, and as a German I was so proud of that. I was like, this is exactly what we should be doing, we should be taking these people in. But actually what they've done in Germany is they've just decided which migrants are acceptable to take in, and so they're being like praised all over Europe for taking all these Syrians, but instead they've just revoked other people's asylum rights. So actually, not only are they like washing their hands of these people, they're picking and choosing which of those people make them look better. And I just think that's disgusting, and we should like draw attention to things like that.
Okay, we've had a lot of questions and discussion about migration. We talked about TTIP and some other things. Are there any other points people would like to make? I mean, about voting to come out of Europe and what that would mean. How Chris talked about holding our noses when UKIP are also arguing. So, are there any other questions around that? People, yeah, over at the back there. Just hold on a second. That's great.
Yeah, I remember my grandparents were Eurosceptic Tories, really, but I remember in the late 90s, and my dad, who was a sort of ex-Maoist, would gently remind them that in 1975 is their son-in-law that, you know, it was the left who put the case against Europe back in the 70s. And I think the way the issue of Europe's come to be so dominated by the right in British politics is a sign of how the left had fallen back from the 70s in Britain. It was a sign of a more general retreat under the onslaught of Thatcher and neoliberalism, really. It was Tony Benn, wasn't he, who put the campaign to come out of Europe in the 70s, and did so for the reason that if you wanted a radical reforming programme, Europe was a barrier to this. You know, any issue can be owned by the right. The issue of war for a long time when we were growing up was seen as the right's issue. People used to talk about the Falklands War, you know, and how that had won for particularly. These issues have been building over time, are all focused down to that vote next week. If the Greeks vote to come out, you know, they are beginning the destruction potentially of this neoliberal apparatus, and we need to be absolutely in solidarity with it. How can we have solidarity with Greece and the anti-austerity movement there if we are committed to voting for that institution in a referendum in Britain? I think we need to be confident, we need to put the case, you know, for democracy and against austerity, and absolutely solidarity against racism. Another Europe is possible. Many of us who were lucky enough to be involved in radical politics earlier this century remember the European Social Forum. We remember it at Alexandra Palace in London, and going to demonstrations like in Genoa against the G8, and Florence, the European Social Forum, you know, where 1 million people marched against the Iraq War, and the call went out for the February the 15th demonstrations. And, you know, at that time you saw another Europe starting to come together. We need to get back to that. You know, we can use solidarity with Greece and the rise of movements like Podemos to help build that alternative Europe.
Take another couple of points. Does anybody?
How this can be
It's really unelected. But surely entering a trade agreement that realistically they won't have to lose and something like that, surely that's a greater loss of sovereignty than the ineffective instruments that do exist.
Thank you. I'll take one more before I ask Chris to come back and sum up on all these points. Is there a last question you'd like to ask? You've been sitting there thinking, I don't know whether to ask this or not. Ask it.
I'll ask another.
You'll ask another. Excellent.
Can we find some sort of point, common ground with the right in that they obviously are opposed to it also because it is unelected, and they do have, there is clearly common ground there and things that we have the same opinion about. I don't know how we deal with that because we fucking hate them.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Chris to come back on those points and to round off our discussion. Before I do, I want to draw your attention to this fantastic little book called Marx for Today, which is only £5, which is for sale over there. This was a Marxist critique session today, so I hope if you've enjoyed the discussion and want to find out more, you'll take a look at this book. And I said earlier about being a founder member of Counterfire and how proud I am that this event has been put on today and the calibre of speakers. So if you want to find out more about the organisation that's hosted today, please do visit the table at the back. And I did mention that I was from Manchester People's Assembly, so I hope I see you all in Manchester in October. And without further ado, Chris, could you answer the question?
The first thing I'll suggest is if you want to read more about this and find out more, I think the best stuff on the UU is written by Susan Watkins in US Review, and you can access it through. I also think, although it's ambiguous in its support for the EU, I think Perry Anderson's Old New World, is it New Old World or Old New World, is the best analysis you can read of the history of the EU.
New Old World.
New Old World is the best analysis you can get of the history of it. But I want to start with your point that someone else mentioned it, which is why I think it would be fatal to make an alliance with the right. And I have to go back to 1975, and the referendum was held. Ancient history for most people in this room, but I think it is quite important. I mean, firstly, the referendum was used by a Labour Prime Minister to effectively sideline Tony Benn. So I'll just get that out of the way. But the fatal mistake, a situation, a strange situation, where the whole discussion in Europe for the last 40 years has been about whether you want to keep sterling. I've got no interest, I don't have much sterling or any other currencies, I'm not concerned about that. Pounds and ounces and all this other stuff. And 22 miles across the channel, it's a completely different debate. And sometimes, as people said a decade ago, a very, very lively and intense debate what another Europe could be. And the reason I think fundamentally is in that referendum campaign in 1975, the Labour left, Michael Foot, to a lesser extent Tony Benn, decided to make an alliance with Enoch Powell and the right-wing, most racist section of the Conservative Party. And the arguments which came to dominate it in the course of that referendum campaign were essentially the Powellite argument based on defending parliamentary Westminster as an institution. And of course, if you think about it for a minute, even the Labour left are craving the love of Westminster. So it became the whole central issue about defending Britain, Britishness, Westminster, and all the rest of it. And that was a huge mistake, and it really set the scene, I think, for what happened, because it allowed the right to take the ball and develop it in the ways it has over the last decade. So I think it would be a huge mistake for us to come on to that. The second question is about Greece. See, I have to say that my opinion really has been for a long time that of Stathis Kouvoulakis, one of the left MPs in Syriza, who's argued this coherently, that the only way Greece can escape from this calvary is to leave the European Union, to leave the Eurozone, to bring back its own currency and impose capital controls. It has to take control of what it can in its economy, difficult as it is in a globalised world. If it cannot do this, it is beggared. And it is beggared because the cost of the austerity measures is now greater than the Greek economy. And they are not going to be allowed to escape it while they remain in the European Union. So they are trapped in a permanent situation like this. And to me, it has to be done. And Cyprus calling a referendum at the last minute is okay, it's good, but really it had to be much more radical than literally going cap in hand in this belief you could negotiate with Christine Lagarde, Angela Merkel, Walter Schauber, and these other people. That was never going to happen. And I think Tariq is right about this, that really what they're about is destroying Syriza to give an example to the people of Spain and elsewhere. You cannot do this. You have to operate inside the tight thing. And it does bring me back to the European Parliament, because again, when I mentioned the cartel that runs it, the man who runs the centre-left group, Martin Schulz, was in Downing Street last week discussing with Cameron. Now, the Social Democratic bloc, which is what it is, do a deals. The European Commission, they're allowed to put on the table effectively amendments. That is what they're allowed to do. And effectively, for anything to happen, the European Commission, they meet together, the European Commission discusses with the two representatives, Martin Schulz and his counterpart, and they stitch up the deal. And because they've got enough voting blocks in it, the centre-right and centre-left can push through what they want in terms of the European Parliament. It is profoundly undemocratic, and there are real limitations of what the European Parliament can do, by the way. Witness the whole fiasco of the European budget, which has never been agreed for how many years now in terms about that. But it shows what the limitations are inside that, and what the lack of democracy comes in. I have to say, on the lack of democracy, we should also remember the European Union imposed 2 unelected governments in both Italy and Greece. You know, finding a European central banker, plucking him from obscurity, and making him Prime Minister of Italy when he didn't have a seat in any elected chamber. Fairly unbelievable. It sums up the level of their commitment to democracy in terms of. And there's a couple of things coming through. I mean, just in terms of coming through on climate change. Well, I think we could do more as a radical British. If there was a radical government in Scotland or a radical government in Britain to commit to climate change. I mean, actually, in one sense, the government in Scotland has done more by moving forward with renewables. But you could create an example and then call on other people to follow. It's a bit like the argument about nuclear weapons. You know, I believe that if Britain got rid of its nuclear weapons, we could film them across the world dismantling our nuclear weapons. And that would be an inspiration to across the world to example us. I nicked that book from a very British coup, which is what Chris Mullins' book. But it's true. You know, we could do things which might be almost demonstrative, but they would have an effect. And I think it's horrible with sovereignty, but I think we have to say, go back to it. It's probably off the agenda in England, but you know, what would have happened if Scotland had gone independent? Of course, there would be a huge row, but it's possible to think about a more radical government in Holyrood. And it's very likely, you know, immediately the EU would be coming in and doing what it's doing in miniature to Greece. You can't do this, etc., etc. Right, all the way through, you're committed to the European Treaty of Lisbon, you're committed to this patch, you're committed to that patch, we have to approve your budget. There's no way through. So it's not a term I like, but I mean, you know, if we elected a radical government of any shape, I would demand it had the right to implement its programme, which is what we have to say about Syriza. You know, they should not have an insistence to cut pensions when they're elected and a promise of not cutting pensions. Who are these people in Brussels to tell them they have to cut the pensions of Greek pensioners? It's outrageous. You know, they're flouting democracy and flouting things through. A couple of things just to the most important one, which is, I'm just looking through. Migration, I think I've covered. I'm just going to finish now. Okay, fine. The key thing we've got to do is build solidarity with the people of Greece, and that means building an anti-austerity movement in this country. And it means building on the success of last Saturday's demonstration here, and it means all roads must lead to Manchester in October, because we have to be on the streets fighting austerity and giving practical solidarity to the people of Greece.
I realise there still was, you know, more time for discussion and more questions. I mean, I personally get quite uncomfortable when we sit here in silence, but I don't want you to feel that I have cut the debate. Chris has summed up really nicely, but if there is anything else anybody wanted to say, we do have time to take any more questions or anything else. Can you just take one more there? Because sometimes when you hear the summing up and the meeting's finished, you think, I wish I'd asked that question.
Hi. This actually goes back to climate change again. So I don't know if this is really naive or not, but it feels like if you're saying that we could potentially do something that's much better if we have a radical left government, are we in a position where our right government at the moment could do something much worse if we're not in Europe? And that feels really precarious when we've got these global issues that are really important now. I don't know if you've got any more thoughts on that, but...
I'll give you a quick answer. David Cameron just cut the subsidy for land-based turbines, didn't he? Effectively deciding, for instance, for the people of Scotland and Wales, without any reference to them. No one in Europe batted an eyelid. You know, I mean, it's very interesting. The difference is Cameron does something which directly attacks, actually, the attempts to limit climate change. Nothing is said about it. You know, compare and contrast with the treatment of Cyprus in Greece.
Or would anybody else like to have a go at answering that question, or any of the others that have come forward? I can't see. This is part of the problem. Oh yes, waving. You have to wave dramatically at me.
Hi Chris, what is the motivation of the EU to screw over its member countries so much?
Does anybody else like to have a go at answering that as well? That's a good question. Yes, there's one over there. Right over in the corner, thank you.
Hi. Don't you think that it's not just Europe, but the national government which have become less democratic and more neoliberal than in the 60s? What the media call now radical left is just proposing policies that were standards in the 60s. So I don't think it's just a problem with Europe, it's a problem with the national countries which I don't think are much more democratic than Europe. Europe is a reflection of the national government.
Thank you. So anybody, you can have a go at answering some of these questions as well. Yeah, here in the middle.
Hi. I'm from Greece, but I want to do a Greece-related question now. You just mentioned at some point that actually in European Union we do what Merkel wants. But is it just that? I mean, does Merkel have to pay to the capitalists, for example, to the foreign capital, to some other powers? Or is it just the political power?
Thank you. Yes, here at the front. Thank you. And then there's.
It's just a clarification question, really. Is the referendum called in Greece today, in effect, a referendum on membership of the EU, or would there be a way of their continuing their membership and rejecting the bailout proposal?
Right, that's a good. And there's one over here. We're on a roll now. This is great.
A question out of ignorance. What is it about the Maastricht Treaty, if there's time to explain what it is about the Maastricht Treaty that actually change the direction of Europe and introduce neoliberalism?
Can you take one more? Yep, and go to the back by the window.
I'd like to come back to a question that was asked earlier about what the UK, could look like if it came out of Europe. And I'd just like to mention Iceland. Iceland didn't actually come out of Europe. Some of the policies they've implemented recently could be implemented here. If Greece comes out of the EU, they could be implemented there. Iceland owns its own currency. Greece could easily do that. It would be perfect conditions for Greece to do that. And we could also do that. We have to own our own currency and get away from the banking network that keeps us all in this fear.
Thank you. Okay, I guess we're done. You've got a few there to have another crack at, Chris. That would be great.
You're right about Iceland, and Iceland did do that, and it has escaped from a lot of what's happened since the collapse of its economy. economy, it's rejuvenated the economy. This is not a left-wing success story, I have to say, but it shows what can be done. Malaysia, actually, if you really want to pursue it, has also shown that if you impose capital controls, which are not supposed to be, it's not supposed to be allowed now, you can revive your economy. But we should be looking around the world at some examples of people who have not gone down the austerity path and done other things to rebuild their economy, which is what I think the groups agree. What is the motivation of the EU? That's an excellent question. The EU is today, I would argue, becoming, and again, do not take this as anti-German, but it is becoming essentially a core country of Germany and its associated economies around it, excluding France. Excluding France, which used to be the central axis of the EU. Right? That's how it's supposed to run. It is increasingly becoming a core area of rich countries, not for everyone, of course. I mentioned the Greek, German workers have suffered very, very badly. And then a peripheral area, Britain is, and France are kind of, and then you get to the real periphery. And that is what's happening here, and the point about Eastern Europe. And what they'd use is the periphery to impact on the working people of the core by saying that this constant threat, if you don't accept this, we're going to take away our investment and we'll move to Bulgaria or, wherever. And it is called the race to the bottom. And it's a competition in which every country in Europe is supposed to take part in having the lowest corporate tax, the worst health and safety, the worst, this is happening, by the way. Health and safety was scrapped in some of the Baltic states effectively. It's happening here in many ways. A constant, cutting labour costs, boosting profitability. This is the motivation for the EU. And if you like, the word for it at the end of the day is profit. And it's a very one-sided class war, which has been running now for 4 decades, and they've seized on the financial crisis of 2008 to push the neoliberal agenda even further down the road. And I don't have to talk about this because we know it here, what the reality of work is for people in this country now. I had to go back to the private sector some time ago. Actually, it's a thing to say, whenever I told this, things in the 1970s were a lot better at work than they are now. It is considerably worse in this country, and it's going to get worse because this is what's happening. And I know some people on the left don't seem to notice this, but the huge increase of precarious labour, they're not some separate group. Is in Southern Europe, which is now coming here, is about driving down conditions for those people in permanent jobs. Because I know it from my own work. If you sit next to someone who's not on a permanent contract, I'm not actually on one either, I'm a rolling one, but if you sit next to someone who's not even getting paid for working there, it creates an atmosphere where you keep your head down. With the proliferation of line managers and all the rest of the stuff that's going on, and that's what it's about in terms of Europe. In terms of the comment you asked about trade blocs, we should be very aware. We've got the EU, which is a trade bloc, NAFTA, which is a trade bloc. The Americans are now negotiating with Japan a Pacific trade bloc aimed against China. This is a very dangerous world in other respects as well, because when you have these huge tectonic plates of trade bloc like this, you can see what is going to happen in terms of clashes, and also the exclusion of China from them, and Russia and other countries, is very dangerous. And you asked about Maastricht. I'm just seeing what else there was. Oh yeah, the Americans, you asked, someone asked. Yeah, Barack Obama has already said that he wants Britain to stay in the EU. The Americans love the EU. They always wanted it. They were annoyed that Churchill didn't go into it actually Attlee didn't go into it after the Second World War, because they want Britain as the loyal dog inside there, monitoring things in terms of British interests. But they want the EU. And they quite like the fact that it's not quite a United States of Europe because it's weaker and it allows them to influence. But they like it. They've always liked it. And they are going to be calling for, as they already have, for Britain to stay in it. I haven't got time to say on it. It's very much part of our agenda, and we should, again, look at Ukraine and see how much the Americans worked with the EU in terms of the destabilization of the Ukraine, in terms of using all the classic maneuvers of that. And lastly, I haven't got time to talk about Maastricht, but it was about economic convergence, not bringing the economies together, but imposing controls on those economies, particularly by restricting the way your currency could operate, the rate of interest you could change. By bringing it down and narrowing it down, it suits essentially that inner core of Germany. It doesn't suit Greece. It doesn't suit Italy. It doesn't suit, and it semi-suits us in a sense. But that's what it's about. And it's about using monetary policy in lots of ways to impose a familiar story, isn't it, for those who've studied the 1980s under Thatcher, but that's what it's about. And the tightening of that has continued ever since inside the process, which is why Thatcher was a fan, actually, of the master, one of the architects of it in terms of it. But vote no.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for fielding all those questions and for coming here today.